Welcome to North Node, the yoga and astrology podcast. I'm Becky, a yoga teacher, astrologist, and businesswoman.
And I'm Laura, founder of Soul Sanctuary Studios, yoga teacher trainer, and wellness coach and consultant. In this podcast, we'll be diving into down-to-earth but deep soul conversations.
We'll explore how you can connect and stay on purpose with your true north alignment through the transformative lenses of yoga and astrology.
Each episode is designed to inspire and guide you on your own journey towards self-discovery, self-love, and personal growth. We'd really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform. Your support will help us reach more listeners who are looking for insightful discussions and meaningful connection.
Thanks so much for joining us. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. And today we're going to be talking about addiction. And this has been one of the topics that we've been wanting to speak into for a while, isn't it, Laura? But we felt, not quite ready to do it. We wanted to do this subject justice because it's a really, really important one. And then you did your interview with Adam, your podcast, while I wasn't around. And Adam mentioned addiction in the opening part of that podcast and talked about like his relationship with steroids over, the 7-8 year periods. And yeah, now felt like the time to pick that topic up, pick that thread up while it's fresh for us and talk about it a little bit more. So yeah, what are your thoughts on addiction, Laura, as an opening sort of, don't know what the word is.
Some sort of intro. Thanks.
Yeah.
It was interesting, it was funny with the interview with Ads and like we were saying, how brave and how well we thought he did there, not to be patronizing, but just because, he was very vulnerable and he was very honest in that, which always takes a lot of bravery. And I didn't speak to him beforehand about what he was going to talk about. I just said to him, we want to hear the male perspective on some of the things we've been talking about toxic masculinity and mental health and just whatever you feel is right. And I was really surprised when he opened with, that he had a 8-year addiction to steroids. And it really, it shocked me when he said it because he's never really phrased it to me like that before. And that is, of course, exactly what it was. But it just prompted me to really think about the impact of addiction and what addiction really is. And it is such an interesting topic because, again, I think it's one of these ones that is kind of not spoken about. There's a bit of a taboo around it. And, there's always problems laying within taboos because the more we can bring it into light, the more information we have, the more we can support and help people with it. And I look at my dad, my dad was an alcoholic and so addiction is in the family, but it's one of those things, like as we've been talking about it, Beck, I think we all have addiction within us. We have addictive tendencies. And so we'll explore kind of what those look like. And there are those stereotypical ones, that we all get the kind of headline, which is like the drug addiction or the alcohol addiction. But then there's just much subtler ones that we all maybe do. And for me, we were laughing because perfectionism is almost a version of that. It's needing control on things, having to be right. But, smaller things like chocolate addiction, food addiction, we see that so much today, addiction to cosmetic surgery, to needing to look a certain way. And so what Becky and I have kind of been drilling into is, where does this need come from? Where does addiction actually come from in whatever form it takes? Because really the action is just the byproduct of, I believe, a discontentment or a dissatisfaction somewhere. We're not feeling content. And so we're searching for contentment. And whether that's in looking bigger, steroid addiction, feeling more manly, feeling good enough in some way, buying more things so that we feel good enough, feeling unhappy, so comfort eating. Ultimately the root of addiction is this dissatisfaction. And I think when that dissatisfaction gets so painful and so difficult to be with self. So whether you're feeling like so anxious or so depressed that it makes it really hard to exist on a day-to-day basis, I totally understand why people would turn to things like alcohol or drugs to numb themselves from that pain, to distract themselves from the reality of life, which can be so bloody hard. And that's why I have like so much empathy, and I feel like there just shouldn't be a taboo around addiction, because ultimately it's just people finding life really flipping difficult, and for whatever reason not having the tools to cope with that on a daily basis, and so opting for pain relief is what I see it to be. And then when it does relieve them from the pain of the general, day to day, and how difficult and painful that can be when you're in a stressful situation or whatever's going on in your life, and then this thing works and it gives you pain relief, of course you're going to become addicted to that. Of course you're going to need that. And we will all have, from a kind of psychology and a chemical predisposition, some of us are going to be more prone to needing certain chemicals, and therefore be more prone to addiction. I know, Becky, you're going to speak later on also how the astrology plays into that, how our placement will show if we have more prone or more tendency to more easily get addicted to things, and how life stages can trigger that. So it's a really complex topic, and what I want to make sure is that we do this with just all the empathy in the world, because life is really hard, and I totally understand why people will need to escape it at times. What we want to look at is offering some tools around how we can create a life that maybe we don't need to escape from. And when we talk about that, I'm not talking about an external life. I'm talking about an internal world where we feel safe, no matter what's going on externally, because that's where the real resilience lives, right?
Yeah, I was thinking as you were talking about, there's so much judgment around addiction. I remember being at school, and it was like the Grange Hill days where it was like, with drugs and things like that, just say no, and this like very judgy attitude around it. And I don't think that's helpful at all, because at the end of the day, actually everyone has some kind of addiction. I believe is just a more extreme version of attachment, actually. And we all have attachment. We all have something or things, people, situations, routines that we are attached to that make us able to function in the world, you know? And addiction, in a way, is like a more extreme version of that.
Mm.
So I think it's worth reflecting on, yes, some things are deemed like healthy, like somebody who needs to go to the gym every single day, walk so many steps, only eat certain food. That is still an attachment, even if it's having a positive effect on their health. It doesn't always help with resilience, because the moment that you take that thing away, that person is like completely at sea and not resilient. And it's interesting because I've been doing a lot of work. Well, I haven't been doing a lot of work, but my HR department at work have been looking at like life stages and how we're not taught, there's not much education, there's not much support available at like key points in your life, like when everything changes, things like retirement. So for someone who has like worked every single day of their life, and then they get to 65, whatever age it is, and they're going to retire, it's like they don't know what to do with themselves. So we're looking at putting things in place to like support those people or make that transition easier. And yeah, they probably don't have an addiction to work, but they certainly have an attachment to work that has shaped their entire life and given them those feelings of contentment, of feeling worthwhile, of feeling connected to purpose, of feeling not separate to other people, and like having a place in the world. So I think it's really important to just bring that compassion, as you've said, because we all have attachments, whether we like it or not. I was also thinking about this on the sort of lead up to this podcast when we decided we were going to do this topic, and, okay, like, how does this apply to me? And, one of my patterns is definitely like self-neglect in terms of looking after myself sometimes, because life is busy and I'll always prioritize work or, yeah, like getting something organized for the next day. And that will often be at the expense of me going to the gym or, going to the shop and like actually buying the food that I really want to eat or whatever it is. That is like one of my patterns. And how do I overcome that pattern sometimes? And it's not a real way of overcoming it, is I will buy myself something and be like, oh, now I feel better. But it's actually not getting to the root of the problem, So we all have things, whether they're big things, small things, we all have attachments. And I think if we can look at it through that lens, maybe we can just have a little bit more compassion. And also, I want to say, there are people who will be maybe having relationships or had relationships, people in their family who have addictions, and also like acknowledging it's still bloody hard to live with. If you're in a relationship or had a relationship with someone who has an addiction, I haven't experienced that. Uh, so I don't feel qualified to speak on it, but yeah, it's sort of also not bypassing that and saying, oh, well, like it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, this all still comes back to self-responsibility. But those people who are really struggling with addiction need more help to be able to take that responsibility.
Yeah, completely agree with that. I mean, it's when Adam was doing steroids, it was like we got together, it was towards the end of it because I got involved. Well, you kind of, it was that. It was like, it was very, very secretive. He'd been doing it for a long time and it was just obvious. And me being me with like, can't deal with an elephant being in the room and not talking about it. We spoke about it. And eventually he was honest. And then, we just, with all the love in the world, just looked into like, where is this coming from? And you are enough as you are. So why the need to do this? And just really a long journey on trying to help him genuinely feel like he was enough as he was and that he didn't need to do it anymore. And thankfully that message has landed. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you talk about living someone with addiction, because as you say, addiction or attachment, yeah, really, these things are so closely connected. And I'd say, yeah, Adam and I are attached to a lot of things, like we both really need our exercise. Like I need a run in the morning. And with it is really just awareness to just go, is that controlling me or am I controlling it? It was always the question. We brought this up on teacher training because we're both, my like favorite time in the year, we're in the throes of the in-person teacher training at the moment. And lots of these topics come up. And it's about like, yeah, we had this discussion on the training about stillness and how some of them were struggling. We got some high rocks athletes in the training. One of them's really like been quite high in the game there, and she was struggling with stillness. And we got an ex-dancer, professional dancer. So it was this like, oh, I'm just struggling with the stillness. And yet, you've got other people in the room being like, are you joking? We're doing like chaturangas all day long. This is not still, and it's like that thing where it's not about the thing that you're doing, it's how you're thinking about doing it. And there was this, attachment to movement and body image usually being connected to that. And that's, certainly what Adam had. And yeah, I would say it's still a question mark that on a day-to-day basis, when it's like, we'd both love to go and do exercise and we can't today. And like having children just is a route to healing, isn't it? Because you just can't, like, we just don't have the time anymore. And we sort of laugh at the old days when we used to be able to train every day and things like that. You're forced to let go of these things. And I think that's really healthy. Life is that practice of letting go, isn't it? Of these things that we need. And often what I say on these trainings and what I genuinely felt after my training, which I often refer back to, is I feel like real resilience is feeling within yourself that you could be kind of teleported out of where you are now, dropped into the jungle, and just kind of go, I think I'd figure it out. Like, I think I'd be all right. You know, none of the things that you rely on, none of your comforts, but you'd be okay. You know, maybe they'll be tested on that one day. But it's that, just that feeling of real inner, like, resilience is the only word that I can come up with, that means that we aren't reliant on these external factors, that we know how to self-regulate emotionally, you know, when we have the tools within us to cope. And in yoga, we often talk about this. Whenever I'm teaching classes or training people to be teachers, I will always bang on about making sure when you are teaching people, you are cultivating independence and not codependence. Because the tools that yoga gives you, I believe, are the tools for self-regulation, which gets you out of so much of the trickiness of life, because it isn't the external circumstance. You know, we know that because one person can have a seemingly perfect life and have huge anxiety and depression, and another person can have a really challenging life and be just so happy with their lot. So it's nothing to do with the externals, it's all to do with the internals. And if you become, you know, the sort of the master of the mind, or you can at least see it, you have this awareness to be able to see it, to see your patterns, to be interested by it, and to have all these different tools at your fingertips to go, oh, what if I try that or try that? Then you're resilient, because you're able to look at what you're doing and you've got tools to adjust if it is or it isn't working for you, no matter what is going on for you externally. And so when we're teaching yoga classes, you know, it's brilliant to give people these tools, but what you want to do is give them the tools in a way that goes, you don't need me to practice this, right? I don't want you to be dependent on me as a teacher. I don't want you to only feel safe and well and able to regulate in my class. I'm doing you a disservice. Lovely if you feel like that, but as a really good teacher, what I want to do is give you the tools so that you can go home and you can move across the world and you can go through the most stressful time in your life, and you can get on your mat and you can breathe and you can move in a way that brings you back to peace. That is what we're trying to cultivate, is independence and not codependence. Ultimately, that's resilience, I believe, not being codependent on something else, whether that's yoga, whether that's drugs, whether that's alcohol, whether that's shopping, whether that's food. We don't want to be codependent on stuff. We want to be independent and resilient and know that no matter what happens to us, we have what it takes within us to feel peaceful, because I believe that's what we're craving.
Yes. And, you know, I think the thing with yoga, one of the biggest things that it's taught me through the practice of yoga and then taking those teachings away from the mat, is literally everything in the human experience is temporary. Everything. What you look like, what your body looks like, the home that you live in, even the people you have around you change throughout your life. You know, it gets you more comfortable with death, because you see everything is temporary. And what that does is really puts you into the present moment of like being able to practice that santosha, that contentment, because really all you ever have is now. So yoga teaches us this through observing the breath. Every time you show up on your mat, you're breathing differently. You do some poses, your breath changes again. What you experience in the pose, like if it's a hard pose, if you're struggling to be still, if you're just struggling because, you know, you're in a difficult, more challenging posture for a few minutes, is it teaches you, well, okay, but there's another pose coming up and time's going to move on. And, you know, it's not about attachment. And, you know, also in yoga, it teaches you not to be attached to certain poses and like, oh, I must be able to do a handstand, or I must be able to do a crow pose, whatever it is, whatever that pose is. You know, if you're attached to being able to do it, then you're not practicing the yoga almost. It's okay to, you know, want to do it and have like that desire and challenge. But if you're so attached to doing it, you're kind of missing the whole point, you know? So there's just so many lessons woven through the practice of yoga. And, astrology is sort of builds on that because the planets are moving all of the time. So how this makes you more resilient is, something terrible happens. I don't know, you lose your job and you're feeling awful about that. All the fear comes up. What if I can't afford to do this? What am I going to do now? You feel purposeless, whatever it is. That is a lesson in showing you how attached to that job you were. And so, how can you detach from that and have this sense of worth and purpose, without that thing? So, I think whenever the universe brings us challenges, it's sort of showing us where those attachments lie as well. And to me, like that is the core of yoga. Yoga is about inner union, that yoking together of self, which really cultivates this resilience.
Yeah, exactly that. It's interesting when you talk about that. So in attachment for yoga lives in the kleshas, which are the poisons of the mind. So bringing in some yoga frameworks here. So we spoke about the koshas. That was a recent episode that I did. But the kleshas are the poisons of the mind, and raja specifically is attachment. So this is the third klesha, and it's basically about being drawn towards things that give us personal satisfaction. So we end up like craving for that feeling again. In Buddhism, they call it this craving, which is not a good thing because it's suggesting that like you need it, and without it, you're craving it again. So then we're like a victim to it, like it's controlling us and we're not controlling it. And that can lead to these feelings of greed or jealousy or just a sense of lack when we don't have it. So there's nothing wrong with having like desires, but when they're kind of mindlessly acted on, and that's the difference, whether we're aware of them or we're mindlessly acting on them, then it gives us less time to be kind of present and in tune with ourselves, when I did my pregnancy yoga teacher training, I always remember she was a wonderful, wonderful teacher in Putney, Sherry Lathy, and she was just this wise woman. And she was doing my training. She was probably in her, must have been her late 60s or 70s then. So now, yeah, she must be late, yeah, 80s. But her like overall message, which I really took away from it, was that life is just one long lesson of letting go. And that anxiety is caused by the holding on of the old self. And I remember that really hitting me, like, especially because we were in a pregnancy yoga training. And then when I became pregnant, those words just rung in my ears because I would have been trying to hold on to the old self. And I was like, I wanted to grow my business. I was really struggling with my body changing. Like I wanted to do all the exercise, da, 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 da. And really then that's just the paddling pool for when you actually have kids, right? And it's just letting go of everything that you expected and that you thought you'd do and you thought you'd look like and you thought they'd behave. And life is just one long lesson of letting go. She's so right. And that is a practice of non-attachment, of not needing all of these things to be okay, whatever that might be. So that's interesting when you look at the kleshas, and so the kleshas themselves, they're poisons of the mind. So these are this is what we're talking about, the confusions in the mind. And I always find it so fascinating that the trunk of the tree is avidya, which is spiritual ignorance. So what they're saying is like, if the branches of the trees are, things like attachment or fear of death or asmita, the more I make the world about me, the more stressful it becomes, all of these things. If you just cut the trunk of the tree, which is spiritual ignorance, then none of those things can grow. So it is ultimately about coming back to connection. And that was really interesting when I was speaking to Adam on the podcast. He said this phrase, which I haven't heard him say before either. We do talk sometimes. Sounds like we don't.
Maybe not on the deep stuff.
Yeah, right.
Like the day to day, right? I love that he shared stuff with you that maybe wouldn't have come up in a normal conversation.
And I crave that stuff, so maybe I just have to force him onto a podcast to have those conversations. And he said, he was like, well, yeah, for men, right, it's so important. Like he was talking about male suicide rates, and then he said it's all about connection over isolation. And I was like, yeah, it is connection over isolation. And connection is what we're talking about. And when you look at the trunk of the tree and spiritual ignorance, right? Is this sense of like I-ness, like it's just me, and that is this, yeah, this is this feeling of disconnection that you're doing it on your own. But also when we look at connect, yoga, the word yoga means union or to yoke. It is the journey of the self back to the self. It is about becoming reconnected to yourself first, I believe. And this is where the second framework comes in that is so important, is the koshas, which I spoke about last week. Something that I wanted to add to that was how important this connection to self is. Because I believe, like, if our pain and our dissatisfaction is causing attachment or addiction, if that goes further, then what we're trying to get to is the root of this pain or this dissatisfaction. And ultimately, I think a lot of that comes down to being disconnected to self. And when we are connected to how we feel and we have connection to other people, then some of these byproducts, then the pain is less, and so we don't need these coping mechanisms. And I think what yoga gives us, and what the koshas within yoga is a brilliant framework, is like a map of how to get back connected to self. Because it's all well and good going, okay, well, this is what addiction is, and we think that we do this because we're in pain, and so, you just need to know yourself better, right? Like, in a way, it's like, get to know yourself better, feel more content, and then you won't need it. And it's like, but how? And that's what I love about yoga. Yoga goes, here you go, here's how, and here's a framework, and here's what you need to practice. And the how for me in this is looking at the koshas, which are these layers of being. So I've spoken about it before, but it's ultimately that you have like an Anandamaya kosha, which is your physical layer, and then you move inwards, and the deepest layer is Anandamaya kosha, which is your bliss body. And this is this contentment that is within. If we can work through these layers, there is peacefulness there within us. We don't need to be reliant on these external circumstances to find that. We just need to work our way inwards. And when somebody first comes to a yoga class, they are just working with that physical body. They're just trying to connect to that first physical bit. And we always laugh on teacher training. It's like, you do warrior 2 and you'll go, lift your back arm in line with your front arm, and they all look at where their back arm is because they can't feel it, because they're not connected to self, right? And then on a deeper level, I'll go, right, spread your toes really, really wide, and then crunch up all your toes and just lift your big toe. And they're looking at their toes being like, move, and they're not doing it because it was so disconnected. Even on a very first layer, where is my back arm? Why can't I move my toes? Because we live so much in our head and thinking and in fear, we completely disconnect from our body. So the first process of connection is reconnecting to that physical layer, and then you can start moving in to the pranamaya kosha is your energetic body, your manamaya kosha is your mind body, your vijnanamaya kosha is your wisdom body. When you start moving deeper into those layers, like how do I feel? First of all, like, am I hot? Am I cold? Have I had any food? Have I had a drink? Do I need a wee? Like physical stuff. Let's face it, that we completely forget when we're stressed working in office. You get home and you go, I don't have a drink today. I didn't wee today. I forgot to eat today. Like basic needs not being met on that external body layer. When you can start to really get tuned into that, you're then able to feel more subtle layers, like, how do I feel emotionally? What is the feeling that's coming up for me here? Am I angry, or am I scared? Or what is going on for me here? And this is what I've been working with a lot with Adam, because he gets stressed and I'll say to him, what is it? He doesn't know the feeling. He can't feel the feeling, and that is that disconnection. And when you can't feel the feeling, life becomes really difficult because you don't know what you're doing. You don't know how to self-soothe, and that's why you then crave this soothing from external stuff, whether it's distraction or whether it's numbing, through whatever activities, with distraction through shopping, through constantly being busy, or numbing through alcohol, or transcendence, up and out. Like, let's just live in a hallucinogenics world because it's less painful than this world. Like, when you can't feel how you feel, you don't know how to self-soothe, life's really painful. And when it's really painful, you're going to need to up and out and go somewhere else. And then you're going to be addicted to that because you don't have the tools to live in this world. And so I believe that the way that you live in this world is through connection. And the way to get to connection is first get connected with your physical body, then get connected with your emotional body, the layer in, how do you feel? And when you work deeply into that and really know your emotions, that's where your bliss body lives. That's where contentment lives, right, Beck?
Yeah, I was reflecting on something that came up on teacher training this weekend, and I think also like it's taking responsibility. And this may or may not resonate with people, but it resonated with people on the training on the weekend. Now, you made a choice to incarnate here and experience life in a human body, knowing that it was going to be hard. To come into Earth School to evolve your soul, because going through like the hard stuff is the fastest way to evolve your soul. So you don't do it in this lifetime. Well, like maybe you're going to have to come back. So I said, coming to Earth School is like doing your PhD for your soul. Um, yeah, and I think you can sort of take that back. A lot of what you're talking about here is separation. So if you think about at a more spiritual level, which, is the root of the trunk of the tree here, spiritual ignorance, if we become spiritually aware that, okay, I'm a soul living in a human body, how did all of this begin? And you can take it back to that point, then I think it gives like this bigger perspective for your soul. And that's one of the things that astrology can show you. But it's this idea that, okay, where did we all come from? Like this infinite energy source that I would call source, but other people might call it God, the universe, the all, the divine. But in the beginning of time, there was only oneness, this source energy, not you and me and separation, just unity, just like this idea of light consciousness, a field of unconditional love and infinite possibility. And when you come from that place, like there's nothing to crave because nothing was missing. There's no fear because nothing was separate from anything else. And that is the soul's true home. And that is where the craving begins. So when we understand that is where the craving begins, we can sort of think, oh, okay, that's what I'm trying to achieve through addictive behaviors, through attachment. And so at a certain point, this all-knowing source became aware of itself and was like, hey, I want to experience myself, decides to separate, to know itself, to feel, to be able to create worlds, to evolve. And source continued to separate, where we are all just these tiny strands of energy. We know energy can't be created or destroyed. We're this tiny fractal of source energy, experiencing source on behalf of source to like give feedback. And that's why good and evil can exist, because it's all just experience to source, because source is love. So it's this sense of separateness that is created through that we're all trying to move away from and move back to unity. So the soul just has this longing to not be separate. And of course, then we go through that, when we're born, we become separate from our mother. It's like, again, the microcosm mirroring the macrocosm of source energy. And, the child has to learn to grow up on its own, experiencing separation, experiencing like the polarity of Earth. And this is where like, yin and yang is like a huge teaching around this. And so, then we all have a soul memory of, so, these fractals of source have all separated, and then your particular fractal of source will have had all of these different experiences. And it's then why we're more prone, I believe, to like seek sort of move away from this separation in certain ways. Like someone who's practiced yoga a lot in previous lifetimes, like probably we have, Laura, because we're so connected to it and we just resonate with all of the teachings so much. We're going to seek that through samadhi, which is the experience that you have following a yoga practice where everything just feels like nothing else matters in that moment. But other people are going to seek union with God, you know, people perhaps who are walking a more religious path, and those with addictions are going to seek it through drugs or alcohol, because maybe that's what their soul remembers and knows as a way to do it. So, yeah, that's what I believe anyway. And true unity isn't something we can ever get from outside of us. It's not a person, it's not a substance, it's not even God outside of us, because, you know, we all have that source energy within us. Unity is remembering that we're never separate to begin with. And where yoga is different is it does take you in through the layers of the body back to self. It's not about searching outside of yourself.
Yeah, I love that. It's so clear the way that you explain that. And I think this is also why I like fell in love with astrology, because it was a seeing. For me, it was like when you say, look, we're a soul in a human body, we're in earth school, it's just like boom, it's just perspective. You just can zoom out and go, God, what is all this nonsense that I've been tied up with? All this confusion. And that's what they call it in Buddhism, is like they're just confused. They're confused because they're attached to these thoughts about the material world, about self, about ego. And actually, like when we zoom out and we go, hold on a second, like this isn't the first time we've been here. It's not the last time we're going to be here. We're just here to learn lessons. What is this lesson teaching me? What can I learn about myself? It's a whole new different way of seeing. And like, that's, I think, what, you know, we say the word wisdom, and when we're talking about the koshas, we talk about Vajrayana kosha, which is the wisdom body. It's the layer before the Ananda kosha, which is the bliss body. When we have wisdom, and the root of wisdom is wid, like window is the see. When we have a seeing and we have a clarity of what life is all about, and I really think astrology gives us that, we aren't so attached to the minutiae, you know, of what in yoga they call the Maya. The Maya is the illusion of the material world. And it is that real understanding. It's all just an illusion. It isn't a truth. It's nothing to be attached to. There's a real confusion if you're getting attached to that small stuff, because you're missing the bigger picture of what is going on. And astrology gives us that wisdom of what that bigger picture is. And for me, a lot of this, when we talk about these confusions of these attachments and this material world, a lot of it boils down to ego. And one of those kleshas, those poisons that we spoke about briefly then, was asmita. The more I make the world about me, the more stressful life becomes, right? And again, like we see, cut the trunk of the tree of the suffering of the kleshas, avidya, that you can see why, like, the spiritual ignorance, you become spiritually aware, you're able to zoom out and see, you can see how ridiculous it is to make the world about you, because you're just passing through. Like, and we're just here to learn and evolve and get our PhD, you know, our soul life lesson in this time, this lifetime, and that will keep moving on. But it's really interesting when we look at ego, because when we look at things like depression, which is a form of addiction, like, you know, we're stuck in that, we're stuck being addicted to that feeling, to that way, to that state. And it is often out of our control. But what they have found, and interestingly, what they're starting to use now, are things like hallucinogenic drugs to quick fix people out of their ego basically being out of control, about really believing what their ego is telling them. You know, Asmita, when I make the world about me, the more stressful it becomes. Like, it's ego focused, me focused, right? And when you can take certain hallucinogenics, and there's always a really great experiment that they use as an example, where somebody with chronic depression, you know, suicidal, took hallucinogenics, they experienced themselves, and bear with me because I know this sounds mad, burst into post-it notes, right? This was the hallucinogenic experience that they had. But in that lived, felt experience, their physical body, everything dissolved, and they realized how insignificant all of that material stuff was. They couldn't unsee or unfeel that feeling that they felt about being able to kind of witness, still being there, but not being attached to the physicality of life, to the Maya, to the illusion of the material world. And then when they come back, there's such distance between self and this material world that they can't be attached to ego in the same way anymore, that the depression, that the anxiety dissolves, because they can see how silly it was to be so attached to those feelings. So it's like a fast track to detachment. Now, I'm not here promoting hallucinogenics. This is something that is coming into the medical world now, and they're creating regulated versions of it. So to help people fast track out of it, because the reality is, it's a long game. To do the work, to realize that we have ego, to meditate enough on it, to do enough yoga, to commit to living a life which is detached from ego, is a long game. And I think the only way is through, because I think you also don't want to get addicted to hallucinogenics that up and out transcend you out of this pain. Immanence, going inwards to peace, is the only way through. But it isn't easy. It's a commitment, it's a lifestyle. And that's why I think the relationships that you create in places like a yoga studio, what we have in teacher training, what we have in our group, Becky, is just incredible, because you're around like-minded people who have gone, no, I choose this life. I choose through. I choose to really work with my feelings and find peace in a long-lasting way and embrace all the challenges and support each other on that journey. But we've decided to go through it. And, like we've spoken about before, it's brave work because it's generational trauma. And, you're not only changing yourself in that moment, but, future generations ahead, right?
Absolutely. And the other thing I think that can quickly detach people from ego are things like near-death experiences, where either it can just be that sudden like wake-up call of like what really matters and a reprioritization, but also people have said, when they're sort of leaving their body and then, they make that decision to come back into the body for whatever reason, yeah, there can be that same learning. So, yeah, I think science is slowly catching up with all the things that, the yogis have taught us. And it always makes me smile a little bit when, you see science catching up, that we need this proof, and all of that. But I guess, that's the evolutionary pathway we're on. So,
Exactly that. So we've spoken a bit back about, so we're looking at this addiction as being the output of basically being in pain, right? Or being discontent or feeling disconnected. And so we're looking for that connection. And we look for that contentment. And so we're looking for that externally. And really what we're saying is that peacefulness lives internally, and that the way to kind of access that peace is by becoming very connected to self and to feeling, and working through and working inwards to find that peace. And one of the other frameworks that we can talk about from a yoga perspective of this way of finding peace and going through is also like the 8 limbs of yoga. So we spoke about yoga meaning union and the journey of the self back to the self, so connectedness. And actually the 8 limbs of yoga, which is written in the sutras, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, this is like what yoga is, the 8 limbs of yoga. So you've got like 1, the yamas, which are the things that we try to avoid, almost like codes of conduct. And then 2, you've got the niyamas, which is like the observances, the things we're working towards. This is like how we conduct ourselves in day-to-day life. Then you have 3, which are the asanas. So those are the yoga poses, just 1/8 of yoga. And 4 is pranayama, is breath work, which is so powerful. 5 pratyahara, so sense withdrawal, and then all of that prepares you for meditation. So dharana, concentration. 7 dhyana, meditation, and 8 is samadhi, which is that bliss, is that union, is that contentment. So really everything that we've been speaking about is detailed in yoga in steps 1 to 8, and we can use those practices to experience that bliss. So just another one of those frameworks which is so useful that yoga offers us.
yeah, I love that with yoga. There's so many lenses and so many teachings that is just so rich.
Yeah. And what you've spoken about a bit is the astrology as to how that can help. And I think like our North Node, hence the name of this podcast, is a huge part of that journey, because we're here in Earth School, we're getting our PhD, but for me it's always like you've got to know where you're going. And if we
Mm.
know our North Node and we know the quality that we're working towards, whether that's compassion, whether that's freedom, whether that's whatever that might be, it doesn't matter what happens in the material world. We can be quite detached from that. Jobs can come and go, the relationships can come and go, money can come and go, looks can come and go, because we're not here for that. We're here to learn the lesson of whatever our North Node is. So I think that's hugely helpful on this journey. But what else can astrology teach us in terms of addiction, or help us with? Can we see it coming up in our chart when we might be more tested in that area, or when challenges might come along that mean that we might be more prone to kind of want to escape?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of potential placements in your chart that might lead to addiction tendency. But really, it's the soul's desire to return to unity. Anyone with indicators of addiction in their chart has a strong desire to like return to this unity consciousness. And, like that's someone, a soul making like quite a high risk choice in a way to come into the human body, because they're like, yeah, okay, I know I might get addicted. I know all of these things, but I'm going to remember and I'm going to find my way through it. Because I'm going to talk about addiction tendencies and what they might look like in your chart, but they could also manifest in different ways. Someone who has markers for addiction in their chart may also, that is the same as having a marker for the ability to become very spiritually aware and spiritually connected, because as we've explored, really it's the same thing that they're looking for. So I'm not saying like everyone who has, for instance, strong Pisces energy, or Neptune is the planet of spiritual connectedness, of transcending the human body. So if you've got Neptune, I don't know, in a hard aspect, which means maybe it's square or opposite to the sun or Mars or your ascendant, this can create blurred boundaries, idealism, and getting easily overwhelmed that can lead to these escapist patterns. So it's almost, yes, like that could be a tendency to be addicted. So knowing that, okay, like how else could you channel that energy? And if you've got like a south node in Pisces, like me, I have a south node in Pisces, that can actually be a strong indicator for having previous lifetimes where there could have been addictions, or it could have been like mystical lifetimes as well, because addiction is a way of reliving like this spiritual longing and escaping from suffering. And yeah, like the pathway that I've chosen in this lifetime is to try and integrate that knowledge, that spiritual knowledge, and use it in a positive way. But I could have made different choices. So I think it's also, it's like your chart gives you some clues, but we always have free will in how we use that energy in our chart. So yeah, South Node, a good place to look wherever you've got Neptune and Pisces, and the 12th house, because the 12th house in your chart is the house of the unconscious, of karma and spiritual dissolution. It's about completion in your chart. So whatever planets or points you've got here can point to the hidden wounds, which are our tendencies. That is where we want to return to unity. So I have Saturn in my 12th house. So yeah, there's a need for structure for me with that. Hence, probably why I love yoga and astrology, like these systems that can provide a pathway to integrating those soul wounds, karma, and things like that. The 12th house can also hold the story of any past life vows or sacrifices we made. So yeah, there are different places you can look. Also, your moon. I think your moon is important, because that is how you achieve emotional safety. So I was reading for someone the other day, and she had her her moon in Taurus. And Taurus is like this very grounded energy, wants safety and security. And yeah, that was like not her experience growing up. And her moon like really craved that. So you can kind of see then okay, like my job in this lifetime is to provide that emotional safety and security for myself. It's about, okay, there can be sadness, there can be frustration, all of the feelings that might come up to people in your life, that maybe didn't give you the care that you desired, but then bringing it back to yourself as, okay, but am I going to live that for the rest of my life, or am I going to take that responsibility for myself? And what do I need to do to almost be my own mother and provide that emotional safety and security? Or otherwise, that need might manifest in different ways of, especially in Taurus, it could manifest as a love for food, um, and, security, that you get stuck in a job that you don't like because you desire security. So yeah, your chart can really give you the clues of, like what are the lessons my soul is here to learn, and where is it seeking this unity? Where does it want this unity? And then the trick is like providing that for yourself, which, is not easy even when but at least you've kind of got a direction.
That's exactly it. Like it is exactly that. It doesn't necessarily make it easier, the work easier, but you know what to do. It's like the knowing not knowing matrix, isn't it? It's like you know what you don't know rather than you don't know what you don't know. Like so that's and then eventually you know what you don't know and then you know it all.
Yeah, it's
And then
that, isn't it? That, you can, you're making that unconscious conscious so that you can do something with it instead of like living in, this state of ignorance. And I'm not saying like everyone who doesn't know their birth chart is ignorant, but what I'm saying is, if you have spiritual ignorance and you just think, oh yeah, well, as fully identifying with your human form and not thinking there's anything beyond the day to day in this life and everything's an accident, and I didn't choose this, and why would, then you're just in that state of victim consciousness. So I think if you're spiritually ignorant, you're much more likely to be in that state of victim consciousness.
which is exactly what the trunk of the tree of the glaciers says, right? And that the poisons of the mind are the result of that. So I'm interested, like, we can often see that people who maybe have addiction or have had addiction often then turn to religion or spirituality. So, what do you think is the connection there, Beck?
Yeah, I was thinking about this when I was preparing for this episode, and I was thinking about Russell Brand and how he went from being, yeah, like this heroin addict and the person that he was, and also like sex addict as well. He's trying to, yeah, like get out of his body, but also, there's this craving for connection. And then what he's done now is gone like 180, and he's like fully into like Christianity now. And I saw something on Instagram and he was like being baptized and baptizing other people. Um, so I think it's just a rechanneling of that energy of, to me, like Russell Brand still a little bit, and other people may not agree with me, and that's okay as well. But for me, it's still like looking for something outside of yourself a little bit. And instead of sort of making that pathway in and through, and I think that can be a danger with spirituality and religion, is it just becomes a new replacement for whatever the addiction is, because you're looking for a teacher, you're looking for, and it's exactly what you said earlier, you're looking for a guru, someone else to have all the answers for you, and you're just going to do what they say. The Bible sets out all these rules, like we must do this and we can't do that, instead of like learning to be in integrity with yourself.
Mm.
So I think when people turn from addiction to spirituality, I think it's really important to, maybe going through like the rules and stuff is like the first step of that, but it's not then allowing whatever the practice that you're moving into to become like dogma again. I was talking about this on the teacher training at the weekend because, there's a danger of this with astrology, because if you're like, well, my South Node is in Pisces, and therefore I'm rubbish with boundaries, and I'm never going to be able to like overcome that. So, like, poor me, you're still sinking into victim consciousness, but it's about knowing that and thinking, okay, that's my tendency. And we all have slip ups. We all, our South Node is always testing us through our whole life. But it's about still taking responsibility for that. So I think, yeah, spirituality can be a natural progression for people who've had addictions, but I think you can easily get stuck as well,
Mm.
you know?
Yeah, kind of just coming back to that codependence, isn't it? Codependent on
Mm.
something, whether that's God, whether that's drugs, whether that's astrology even, like, and instead using it as like information to then go through, isn't it? And like, and transform and self-actualize, rather than, what they call spiritual bypassing, which is just that like up and out thing. Um,
Yeah.
Okay, so I think it almost feels like we've just touched the tip of the iceberg. I think there's so much more there, but hopefully that just offers some insight from a kind of yoga and astrology perspective of, yeah, where addiction lies and what could help, and where we might be able to see it in our chart and how we might be able to navigate around that through the tools of yoga and the information that astrology gives us. Beck, is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, exactly what you said, really. Like, I don't profess to be an addiction specialist. And obviously, anyone with addictions needs way more help than I can give them, than we can give them. But what I really hope this episode brings is what we talked about at the beginning, which is like less judgment, more compassion, more spiritual awareness, really.
And what my experience is that anything that we judge, we get served. So,
Yeah.
compassion is the only way forward, really, because it may be that that thing comes to test you later. We're all human. We can all experience all of this. So it's just saying really compassionate and, yeah, trying to understand and learn from all of these lessons around us.
Yeah, exactly. Always open-hearted.
Yeah.
Mm.
Thanks, Beck.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. Your time is precious, and we truly appreciate you spending it with us. We look forward to having you join us again soon. So, take care, and we'll catch you in the next episode.